Hello, I'm Daniela. In today's video, I'm going to show a technique for stitching a cupcake into your slow stitching pieces. This is kind of a fun technique because we use fabric scraps, threadlings, which are thread scraps, and then thread to tack it all down and keep it together. Now the beauty of this technique is not only do you use those thread scraps, but you add dimension and layers to your piece. We'll start by stitching down the base of our cupcake, and from there we'll bring out the thread scraps, the threadlings. We'll attach them to our piece, and you can use an abundance of them or just a few of them. You can sort them by color or add a mixture of color. And all those little variations add up to make a unique style to your piece. So let's get started.
So to make these adorable little fabric cupcakes, I need a swatch of fabric to use for the base of the cupcake, the wrapper really. And then I'm just going to use my little threadlings here. Some people call them ORTS. They're just leftover scraps of fabric that I save in this little jar. And I'm going to use them because I think they're just so colorful. They remind me of frosting, and they give a little texture as well as dimension to my piece. But we'll work on that later. I have a little piece of pearl here that I'm going to use to make my texture for my cupcake wrapper. And then I have just a scrap of embroidery floss that I'm going to use to stitch down those little threadlings. So to get started, I want to cut the shape of the base of the cupcake here. I like to use a neutral fabric. So to do that, to make it symmetrical, I cut it in half, and then to give it dimension, I want the cupcake top to curve up. So I give a little curve there. And then I have the base, and I have it come down at an angle, just like this. And this is a little too wide, so I'll just cut it down further. That's a little bit better. So now I want to start stitching it down, but I want my stitches to be strategic. I could just stitch an outline, and that's totally fine, but I'm going to stitch it to make it have a little more dimension. So I'll stitch parallel lines on the side, and then coming up from the middle, I'm not going to stitch that full line. I'm just going to stitch a little ways, and then I'll stitch two pieces on either side, and I'll do the same thing from the top and the bottom. And I'll show you what I mean. Taking the black thread, the first thing I'm going to do is stitch the sides down. And now I'll make a running stitch on either side to hold my little cupcake liner really in place. You can use whatever size stitches or whatever stitches you want. So now I've stitched just a running stitch on either side, and this starts to tack my piece down. I'm going to come down the center here, and I'm going to stitch a line, but I'm not going to stitch that full line. I want there to be a shadow from the top and coming up from the base, but a little highlight in the center. So this part of the cupcake is not going to have any stitches. I'm just going to have stitches that imply lines. Now you could sketch this out and stitch it neatly in order, but because I have a hard time writing on the black fabric with a pen that will fully erase, I like to just jump around. I'll use more thread this way, but I'll get a beautiful result. So I'm going right to the center, and this is going to be my only perfectly straight line up and down. I'll start right in the center, and I'm going to stitch maybe 3 or 4 stitches, and this is going to be the longest line coming from the top of this cupcake. And this is completely subjective, so use as many or as few as you'd like. I think I'm just going to use 3 here. It's a small little cupcake, and this seems to give enough depth. So now I want to divide this section into different folds of the cupcake. I can do 3, I can do 2, I can do 1. I'm just going to do 2. So I'm going to just kind of eyeball dividing this space, and I want my stitches to kind of angle down, so they're going to start to be parallel to this angle. I don't want it to be perfectly parallel right away, so it's going to be a little bit of a looser angle. And because I want it to look with a little dimension, I'm going to make it less deep than this depth. I can do more stitches, but they're only going to come a little ways up. Now that's twofold. With the dimension, it will give a little more dimension, and it will draw the eye because you're making another line. So now I purposely didn't want it to go as low as this point. This is going to be my lowest point up top. And my next row is going to go even lower. So I'll just actually start right here, coming up from the bottom, and work my way up. So I only need a couple of stitches at this point. Now I want to attach the line at the base here, but leaving that gap. I want the eye to fill in that gap for me. So I'm going to start here, and I'm going to do the inverse on the bottom. So on the bottom where this line would connect, I'm going to go up the highest point on the right hand side and gradually get lower in the center. So I'm going to make my stitches. Again, going right to that base. Now for the next row, I'm going to start at the base and just go up maybe 2 stitches. And so now this line will connect to here, and this line will connect to here. And then I'm going to go even lower for my central line. Now, of course, if you want to stitch the entire line, you should go right ahead and do that. This is just an alternate way to get that effect and still leave a little bit of a highlight. I'll continue to sew on this side, just mirroring this image, and then we can add the top of our cupcake. So now I've stitched all the way around where I want on this cupcake liner to give it the effect of the folds of a cupcake, or even a muffin, I guess you could say. So I've stitched here and here, and then you can kind of connect the lines naturally. Now it's time to add the little threadlings to the top of the cupcake. Now you could make a crazy one really big, but that's too much for me. So I'm just going to kind of pull around some of this little leftover thread, wrap it up, and place it on top to see how I want it. I think I want to add some red to that. So I'll pull some of that embroidery floss in and just play around with it. That's kind of a cute look. Now I have some leftover embroidery floss. I could even use this long red piece if I wanted, but I'm going to go with this lighter piece. It's knotted on the back. Once I kind of gather the shape that I want for the top of that cupcake, I'll just hold it down with my finger and just start making a series of little stab stitches. I like to start in the center and work my way around because I'm just trying to tack it down at first. And as I gradually stitch away from the center, I can start to really shape the object. Now, there's no exact number of stitches that you need just as many to hold it in place. So I can kind of play around with it. I can always tuck in a few more strands if it looks a little sparse in areas. But I like to come over here. I actually kind of like the little chaotic look somewhat. But if it's too much for you, just continue to tuck and stitch. You can stitch right through the embroidery floss little threadlings, and it gives a really cute effect. You don't want to make your stitches too tight. You want them just snug enough to hold your piece in place. And you have a little bit of give. Depending on how you thread your little stitch, you can pull it and really shape that threadling. Makes a little tuft of color. You can also sort the color if you wanted maybe all white to make it look like frosting. You could do that just as easily. I happen to be on a little kick with this rainbow color. I think it's adorable. So I'll stitch around and just continue to do this, tidying it up. And I'll speed this along so you can see the result and how it sort of comes together. It's a rough shape, but it's indicative and suggestive of the cupcake little frosting that billows out from the top of a cupcake. And the colors make it really fun, just like a kid's birthday cupcake. So I just continue to make stitches until it all comes together. Tucking little pieces. You could also trim it with a pair of scissors if anything's a little too wild. You could always add more threadlings on top to fill it in, and that's totally up to you. Gives a really cute effect. So that's the finished stitched cupcake. It's a little abstract and a little fun, but I think it's really cute. I wanted to show you another version with just a different cupcake liner and a little different scale. It's just kind of a fun little technique. It would make a cute little element in your slow stitching.
So that's how I create my slow stitched cupcake. It's really just an element that I can add to my slow stitching, but it's kind of fun because it incorporates fabric scraps and then an abundance of thread. It's not something you see every day, and it's not something you might use often, but when you want that little pop of color and dimension, this is the perfect project for that. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. Thanks for joining me today.